artifacts and high fives, but in Raleigh's prayer we know the reality of the world in which we live. Terrible events of just this past week, just a few days ago, when a mighty tornado comes and levels a whole community 2 miles wide. How do we make sense of this understanding that God cares for us, that God cares for this world? When we have the echo that's always there of faith communities that somehow suggest that those kind of disasters are payback because of our sin. I'm sure some of you could even find a few biblical stories that may suggest that terrible things like floods and earthquakes are God's judgment upon a community. Well, the question I bring to that discussion that I will let you ponder for a little while is that really the nature of God, or is that the understanding of ancients as they tried to make sense of their world? As I try to ponder that question, I have some authority, I believe, in listening to Jesus, who was asked these similar types of questions about the providence of God when it seems that God's totally absent from the picture. Jesus said that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. That seems to be a little fair understanding about these kinds of things that happen in the world that we live in. I mean, do we really want to suggest that the people that lived in Moore, Oklahoma are worse than people that live anywhere else? That they deserved what they got? Or the community around the Newtown school shooting? Was that a worse community than the community that you and I live in? Were those people in Boston that were running the marathon, were they worse marathon runners than other marathon runners in the world? No, storms and sunshine fall on all people, whether they would be considered good or whether they would be considered evil. And it certainly seems to suggest to me, as I listen to what some of these so-called religious authorities are saying, that to assign the mysteries of God to something as commonplace as the weather is an incredible overreach. Suggesting that they could talk for God out of these terrible events that occur. So where is God? What is the presence of God in this mystery of these events? I think I heard the presence of God, the voice of God, and the voice of the teacher huddled with her little classmates in the darkness and saying, "Hang on. You're going to be okay. I'm right here. I'm right here." Or perhaps the teacher, who I know have in different stories that haven't gained national attention, that would step in front of an assailant or a sniper's bullet in order to protect the small, precious children in her or his charge. And I'm certain that God's presence is there with a breaking heart as a person walks through the rubbish that just a few hours earlier was their privileged possessions. And certainly God's heart breaks and cries alongside the parent that's lost a child tragically. That somehow God is present, even not in the grand fanfare of things, but in the common kinds of things that we are called to do. When a community decides to gather together and marshal the resources and build back what had been taken. When a group of parents decide to stand courageously to help eradicate violence and the prevalence of too many guns in our society. When people like you write a check and volunteer your time and walk alongside and compassionately companion those who suffer. God's not absent. God is just more discreet. Like nature, like the power that is this earth, this existence that we share. It's an awesome power. How can you stand on the shore of an ocean or look out over a mountain vista and not understand this is an incredible place. It's powerful and yet terrible. Like these lives, these bodies that we inhabit, they're incredibly resilient and also incredibly vulnerable. A lion, a wild lion may be a beautiful sight behind a cage or separated by a zoo pit, but if that lion's face to face with you without any interference, it's a whole different experience. This world is incredible, and it's mysterious, and it's beautiful, and it's frightening. And all those things go into our existence. And just because God might be discreet, it doesn't mean God is not powerful. It just means that God reveals God's self in ways that aren't always so showy, with the billboards and the flashes of lightning. Now, Martin Luther, the great church reformer, was supposedly walking through a forest, and he was going to become an attorney, and a bolt of lightning hits close to his feet, and he falls down, and he yells, "Saint Anne, help me, I'll become a monk." And perhaps these great kinds of events of storms and tornadoes and earthquakes and tsunamis can help us appreciate the awesomeness of God, but let's certainly never suggest that God has it out for a certain group because of something like that. No, let's point to the power of God that exists in relationship. That we confess that God, in God's own essence, in God's own personhood, God exists in relationship from the very start. That there is a unity of community. And that you and I, who claim God's name, are invited to live in relationship. It's never a lone wolf spirituality, just me and God, and we've got it all figured out, and we don't care about anyone else. The minute I am in relationship with a relational God, then I am in relationship with everyone else in the world. That God calls me into loving relationships. And sometimes, for us who are followers of Christ, that calling means that we have to love the unlovely. That indeed it's easy to love those who love us in return, but it's really a challenge sometimes, isn't it? To love the person that cannot repay us or the person that we find unlovely. But somehow we're convinced that this message is the true message, that this reality is the better reality, that this way of life is the true way of life. And even in our suffering, even in our hardships, even in our struggles and our challenges, we are somehow made better, deeper, more human kinds of people. That there is hope in that endurance and in that struggle. And we are not to shrink away from these challenges or not take any risk in our fear, but to seek to live courageously with an outrageous generosity. Kelly James Clark has written a small book, and it's When Faith Has Failed You, and suggests that sometimes we have to think differently about faith, and concludes that faith alone synthesizes the disparate elements of ourself, finite and infinite, wicked and good, necessary and free, temporal and eternal, body and spirit. That faith integrates those despairing parts of who we are into a meaningful whole. Only through faith can we live an authentic, happy, and fulfilled life. That's the struggle of life and belief, and it's worth all the effort. Everyone has faith in something. Everyone has a higher power. Something that you say is bigger than me that I depend on. For us who are part of a faithful community, it's this incredible story of a God who cares for us, of a God who considers our mere human being existence. That even if we say we are sinners to this righteous and holy God, that still God persists in compassionate love, in redemption, in sustaining our lives and relating to us out of that love. And faith is this hope to live with goodness and generosity and kindness and care, even when the storms blow and when the clouds on the horizon look ominous. Because this is Memorial Day, soon to be. The question is, what will the future generations remember about us?